Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more The Diary of Anne Frank. We are going to be getting back a little more into this. We've been seeing a lot more citizens being taken, and some of the ramifications of not cooperating with the Nazis. So, yeah. But let's jump into this. Friday, November the 20th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, we don't really know how to react. Up to now, very little news about the Jews have reached us here, and we thought it best to stay as cheerful as possible. Every now and then, Miep used to mention what had happened to a friend, and Mother or Mrs. Von Dyne would start to cry, so she decided it was better not to say any more. But we bombarded Mr. Dussel with questions, and the stories he had to tell were so gruesome and dreadful that we can't get them out of our heads. Once we had time to digest the news, we'll probably go back to our usual joking and teasing. It won't do us or those outside any good if we continue to be as gloomy as we are now. And what would be the point of turning the secret annex into a melancholy annex? No matter what I'm doing, I can't help thinking about those who are gone. I catch myself laughing and remember that it's a disgrace to be cheerful. But am I supposed to spend the whole day crying? No, I can't do that. This gloom will pass. Added to this misery, there's another, but of a more personal nature, and it pales in comparison to the suffering I've just told you about. Still, I can't help telling you that lately I've begun to feel deserted. I'm surrounded by too great a void. I never used to give it much thought since my mind was filled with my friends and having a good time. Now I think either about unhappy things or about myself. It's taken a while, but I've finally realized what Father, no matter how kind he may be, can't take um, can't take the place of my former world. When it comes to my feelings, Mother and Margot ceased to count long ago. But why do I bother to go with this foolishness? Or why do I bother you with this foolishness? I'm terribly ungrateful, Kitty, I know, but when I've been scolded for the umpteenth time and have all these other woes to think about as well, my head begins to reel. Yours, Anne. Saturday, November the 28th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, we've been using too much electricity and have now exceeded our ration. The result, excessive economy and the prospect of having the electricity cut off. No light for 14 days. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? But who knows, maybe it won't be so long. It's too dark to read after 4:30, so we while away the time with all kinds of crazy activities. Telling riddles, doing calisthenics in the dark, speaking English or French, reviewing books. After a while, everything gets boring. Yesterday, I uncovered a new pastime, using a good pair of binoculars to peek into the lighted rooms of the neighbors. During the day, our curtains can't be opened, not even an inch, but there's no harm when it's so dark. I never knew that neighbors could be so interesting. Ours are, at any rate. I've come across a few at dinner one family making home movies, and the dentist across the way working on a frightened old lady. Mr. Dussel, the man who was said to get along so well with children and to absolutely adore them, has turned out to be an old-fashioned disciplinarian and preacher of unbearably long sermons on manners. Since I have a singular pleasure of sharing my far too narrow room with His Excellency, and since I'm generally considered to be the worst behaved of the three young people, it's all I can do to avoid having the same old scoldings and admonitions repeatedly flung at my head and to pretend not to hear. This wouldn't be so bad if Mr. Dussel weren't such a tattletale and hadn't singled out Mother to be the recipient of his reports. If Mr. Dussel's just won the riot act, Mother lectures me all over again, this time throwing the whole book at me. And if I'm really lucky, Mrs. Von D calls me to account 5 minutes later and lays down the law as well. Really, it's not easy being the badly brought up center of attention of a family of nitpickers. In bed at night, as I ponder my many sins and exaggerated shortcomings, I get so confused by the sheer amount of things I have to do that I have to consider that I either laugh or cry depending on my mood. Then I fall asleep with the strange feeling of wanting to be different than I am, or being different than I want to be, or perhaps of behaving differently than I am or want to be. Oh dear, now I'm confusing you too. Forgive me, but I don't like crossing things out, and in these times of scarcity, tossing away a piece of paper is clearly taboo. So I can only advise you not to reread the above passage and to make no attempt to get to the bottom of it, because you'll never find your way out again. Yours, Anne. Monday, December the 7th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Hanukkah and St. Nicholas Day nearly coincided this year. They were only one day apart. We didn't make much of a fuss with Hanukkah, merely exchanging a few small gifts and lighting the candles. Since candles are in short supply, we lit them for only 10 minutes. But as long as we sing the song, that doesn't matter. Mr. Von Don made a menorah out of wood, so that was taken care of too. St. Nicholas Day on Saturday was much more fun. During dinner, Bep and Miep were so busy whispering to Father that our curiosity was aroused and we suspected they were up to something. Sure enough, at 8 o'clock, we all trooped downstairs through the hall in pitch darkness. It gave me the shivers, and I wished I was safely back upstairs to the alcove. We could switch on the light since this room doesn't have any windows. When that was done, Father opened the big cabinet. "Oh, how wonderful!" we all cried. In the corner was a large basket decorated with colorful paper and the mask of Black Peter. We quickly took the basket upstairs with us. Inside was a little gift for everyone, including an appropriate verse. Since you're familiar with the kinds of poems people write each other on St. Nicholas Day, I won't copy them down for you. I received a Cupid doll. Father got bookends, and so on. Well, anyway, it was a nice idea. And since the 8 of us had never celebrated St. Nicholas Day before, this was a good time to begin. Yours, Anne. P.S. We also had presents for everyone downstairs. a few things over from the good old days, plus Miep and Bep were always grateful for money. Today we heard that Mr. Van Don's ashtray, Mr. Dussel's picture frame, and Father's bookends were made by none other than Mr. Voskuil. How anyone can be so clever with his hands is a mystery to me. Thursday, December the 10th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. Van Don used to be in the meat, sausage, and spice business. He was hired for his knowledge of spices, and yet, to our great delight, it's his sausage talents that have come in handy now. We ordered a large amount of meat, under the counter of course, that we were planning to preserve in case there were hard times ahead. Mr. Van Don decided to make bratwurst, sausages, and metwurst. I had fun watching him put the meat through the grinder once, twice, 3 times. Then he added the remaining ingredients to the ground meat and used a long pipe to force the mixture in the casings. We ate the bratwurst with sauerkraut for lunch, but the sausages, which were going to be canned, had to dry first, so we hung them over a pole suspended from the ceiling. Everyone who came into the room burst into laughter when they saw the dangling sausages. It was such a comical sight. The kitchen was in shambles. Mr. Van Don, clad in his wife's apron and looking fatter than ever, was working away at the meat. What with his bloody hands, red face, and spotted apron, he looked like a real butcher. Mrs. Van Don was trying to do everything at once, learning Dutch out of a book, stirring the soup, watching the meat, sighing and moaning about her broken rib. That's what happens when old ladies do such stupid exercises to get rid of their fat behinds. Dussel had an eye infection and was sitting next to the stove, dabbing his eye with chamomile tea. Pim, seated in the one ray of sunshine coming through the window, kept having to move his chair out of the way and move his chair this way and that to stay out of the way. His rheumatism must have been bothering him, because he was slightly hunched over and was keeping an eye on Mr. Van Don with an agonized expression on his face. He reminded me of those aged invalids you see in the poorhouse. Peter was romping around the room with Malchi the cat, while Mother, Margot, and I were peeling boiled potatoes. When you get right down to it, none of us were doing our work properly, because we were all so busy watching Mr. Van Don. Dussel has opened his dental practice. Just for fun, I'll describe the session with his very first patient. Father was ironing, and Mrs. Van Don, the first victim, sat down in the chair in the middle of the room. Dussel, unpacking his case with an air of importance, asked for some eau de cologne, which could be used as a disinfectant, and Vaseline, which would have to do for wax. He looked at Mrs. Van Don's mouth and found 2 teeth that made her wince with pain and utter incoherent cries every time he touched them. After a lengthy examination, lengthy as far as Mrs. Van Don was concerned, since it actually took no longer than 2 minutes, Dussel began to scrape out a cavity. But Mrs. Van Don had no intention of letting him. She flailed her arms and legs until Dussel finally let go of his probe and it remained stuck in Mrs. Von Don's tooth. That really did it. Mrs. Von Don lashed out wildly in all directions, cried as much as you can with an instrument like that in your mouth, tried to remove it, but only managed to push it in even farther. Mr. Dussel calmly observed the scene, his hands on his hips, while the rest of the audience roared with laughter. Of course, that was very mean of us. If it'd been me, I'm sure I would have yelled even louder. After a great deal of squirming, kicking, screaming, and shouting, Mrs. Von Don finally managed to yank the thing out, and Mr. Dussel went on with his work as if nothing had happened. He was so quick that Mrs. Von Don didn't have time to pull any more shenanigans. But then he had more help than he's ever had before. No fewer than 2 assistants. Mrs. Von Don and I performed our job well. The whole scene resembled one of those engravings from the Middle Ages entitled "A Quack at Work." In the meantime, however, the patient was getting restless, since she had to keep an eye on her soup and her food. One thing is certain. It'll be a while before Mrs. Von Don makes another dental appointment. Yours, Anne. Sunday, December the 13th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, I'm sitting here nice and cozy in the front office, peering out through a chink in the heavy curtains. It's dusky out there, just enough to light to write by. It's really strange watching people walk past. They all seem to be in such a hurry that they nearly trip over their own feet. Those on bicycles whiz by so fast I can't even tell who's on the bike. The people in this neighborhood aren't particularly attractive to look at. The children especially are so dirty you wouldn't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. Real slum kids with runny noses. I can hardly understand a word they say. Yesterday afternoon, when Margot and I were making a bath, I said, what if we took a fishing rod and reeled in each of those kids one by one as they walked by, stuck them in the tub, washed and mended their clothes, and then tomorrow they'd just be as dirty and tattered as they were before, Margot replied. But I'm babbling. There are also things to look at: cars, boats, and the rain. I can hear the streetcar and the children, and I'm enjoying myself. Our thoughts are subject to as little change as we are. They're like a merry-go-round, turning from the Jews to food, from food to politics. By the way, speaking of Jews, I saw 2 yesterday when I was peeking through the curtains. I felt as though I were gazing at one of the 7 wonders of the world. It gave me such a funny feeling, as if I'd denounced them to the authorities and was now spying on their misfortune. Across from us is a houseboat. The captain lives there with his wife and children. He has a small yapping dog. We know the little dog only by its bark and by its tail, which we can see whenever it runs around the deck. Oh, what a shame. It's just started raining and most of the people are hidden under their umbrellas. All I can see are raincoats and now again the back of a stocking-capped head. Actually, I don't even need to look. By now I can recognize the women at a glance. Gone to fat from eating potatoes, dressed in a red or green coat, and worn-out shoes, a shopping bag dangling from their arms, with faces that are either grim or good humored, depending on the mood of their husbands. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, December the 22nd, 1942. Dearest Kitty, the Annex was delighted to hear that you'll all be receiving an extra quarter-pound of butter for Christmas. According to the newspaper, everyone is entitled to half a pound, but they mean those lucky souls who get their ration books from the government, not Jews in hiding like us who can only afford to buy 4 rather than 8 ration books on the black market. Each of us is going to bake something with the butter. This morning I made 2 cakes and a batch of cookies. It's very busy upstairs, and Mother has informed me that I'm not to do any studying or reading until all the household chores have been finished. Mrs. Von Don is lying in bed nursing her bruised rib. She complains all day long, constantly demands that the bandages be changed, and is generally dissatisfied with everything. I'll be glad when she gets back on her feet and can clean up after herself, because I must admit she's extraordinarily hard-working and neat. And as long as she's in good physical and mental condition, she's quite cheerful. As if I don't hear shh shh enough during the day because I'm always making too much noise, my dear roommate has come up with the idea of saying shh to me all night too. According to him, I shouldn't even turn over. I refuse to take any notice of him, and the next time he shushes me, I'm going to shush him right back. He gets more exasperating and egotistical as the days go by. Except for the first week, I haven't seen even one of the cookies he so generously promised me. He's particularly infuriating on Sundays when he switches on the light at the crack of dawn to exercise for 10 minutes. To me, the torment seems to last for hours, since the chairs I used to make my bed longer are constantly being jiggled under my sleepy head. After rounding off his limbering up exercises with a few vigorous arm swings, his lordship begins dressing. His underwear is hanging on a hook, and so first he lumbers over to get it, and then lumbers back past my bed. But his tie is on the table, so once again he pushes and bumps his way past the chairs. But I mustn't waste any more of your time griping about disgusting old men. It won't help matters anyway. My plans for revenge, such as unscrewing the light bulb, locking the door, and hiding his clothes, have unfortunately had to be abandoned in the interests of peace. Oh, I'm becoming so sensible. We've got to be reasonable about everything we do here, studying, listening, holding our tongues, helping others, being kind, making compromises, and I don't know what else. I'm afraid my common sense, which was in short supply to begin with, will be used up too quickly, and I won't have any left by the time the war is over. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, January the 13th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, this morning I was constantly interrupted, and as a result I haven't been able to finish a single thing I've begun. We have a new pastime, namely filling packages with powdered gravy. The gravy is one of G's and Company's products. Mr. Kugler hasn't been able to find anyone else to fill the packages, and besides, it's cheaper if we do the job. It's the kind of work they do in prisons. It's incredibly boring and makes us dizzy and giggly. Terrible things are happening outside at any time of night and day. Poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. They're allowed to take only a knapsack and a little cash with them. And even then, they're robbed of these possessions on the way. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. Women return from shopping to find their houses sealed, their families gone. The Christians in Holland are also having to live in fear because their sons are being sent to Germany. Everyone is scared. Every night, hundreds of planes pass over Holland on their way to German cities to sow their bombs on German soil. Every hour, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people are being killed in Russia and Africa. No one can keep out of the conflict. The entire world is at war, and even the Allies are doing better. And even though the Allies are doing better, the end is nowhere in sight. As for us, we're quite fortunate, luckier than millions of people. It's quiet and safe here, and we're using our money to buy food. We're so selfish that we talk about after the war and look forward to new clothes and shoes, when actually we should be saving every penny to help others when the war is over, to salvage whatever we can. The children in this neighborhood run around in thin shirts and wooden shoes. They have no coats, no socks, no caps, and no one to help them. Gnawing on a carrot to still their hunger pangs, they walk from their cold houses through cold streets to an even colder classroom. Things have gotten so bad in Holland that hordes of children stop passerby in the streets to beg for a piece of bread. I could spend hours telling you about the suffering the war has brought, but I'd only make myself more miserable. All we can do is wait, as calmly as possible, for it to end. Jews and Christians alike are waiting. The whole world is waiting, and many are waiting for death. Yours, Anne. Saturday, January the 30th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, I'm seething with rage, yet I can't show it. I'd like to scream, stamp my foot, give Mother a good shaking, cry, and I don't know what else because of the nasty words, mocking looks, and accusations that she hurls at me day after day, piercing me like arrows from a tightly strung bow, which are nearly impossible to pull from my body. I'd like to scream at Mother, Margot, the Von Dons, Dussel, and Father too. Leave me alone. Let me have at least one night when I don't cry myself to sleep, with my eyes burning and my head pounding. Let me get away from everything, away from this world. But I can't do that. I can't let them see my doubts or the wounds they've inflicted on me. I couldn't bear their sympathy or their good-humored derision. It would only make me want to scream even more. Everyone thinks I'm showing off when I talk, ridiculous when I'm silent, insolent when I answer, cunning when I have a good idea, lazy when I'm tired, selfish when I eat one bite more than I should, stupid, cowardly, calculating, etc., etc. All day long I hear nothing but what an exasperating child I am. And although I laugh it off and pretend not to mind, I do mind. I wish I could ask God to give me another personality, one that doesn't antagonize everyone. But that's impossible. I'm stuck with the character I was born with, and yet I'm sure I'm not a bad person. I do my best to please everyone, more than they'd ever suspect in a million years. When I'm upstairs, I try to laugh it off because I don't want them to see my troubles. More than once, after a series of absurd reproaches, I've snapped at Mother. I don't care what you say. Why don't you just wash your hands of me? I'm a hopeless case. Of course, she'd tell me not to talk back and virtually ignore me for 2 days. Then suddenly all would be forgotten and she'd treat me like everyone else. It's impossible for me to be all smiles one day and venomous the next. I'd rather choose the golden mean, which isn't so golden, and keep my thoughts to myself. Perhaps sometime I'll treat the others the same with the same contempt as they treat me. Oh, if only I could. Yours, Anne. Friday, February the 5th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, though it's been ages since I've written to you about the squabbles, there's still no change. In the beginning, Mr. Dussel took our soon-forgotten clashes very seriously, but now he's grown used to them and no longer tries to mediate. Margot and Peter aren't exactly what you'd call young. They're both so quiet and boring. Next to them, I stuck out like a sore thumb, and I'm always being told, Margot and Peter don't act that way. Why don't you follow your sister's example? I hate that. I confess that I have absolutely no desire to be like Margot. She's too weak-willed and passive to suit me. She lets herself be swayed by others and always backs down under pressure. I want to have more spunk, and I keep ideas like these to myself. They'd only laugh at me if I offered this in my defense. During meals, the air is filled with tension. Fortunately, the outbursts are sometimes held in check by the soup eaters and people from the office who come up to have a cup of soup for lunch. This afternoon, Mr. Von Don again brought up the fact that Margot eats so little. I suppose you do it to keep your figure, he added in a mocking tone. Mother, who always comes to Margot's defense, said in a loud voice, I can't stand that stupid chatter of yours a minute longer. Mrs. Von Don turned red as a beet. Mr. Von Don stared straight ahead and said nothing. Still, we often have a good laugh. Not long ago, Mrs. Von Don was entertaining us with some bit of nonsense or another. She was talking about the past, about how well she got along with her father, and what a flirt she was. And you know, she continued, my father told me that if a gentleman ever got fresh, I was to say, remember, sir, that I'm a lady. And we know what I meant. We split our sides laughing, and she told us a good joke. As if she told us a good joke. Even Peter, though he's usually quiet, occasionally gives rise to hilarity. He has the misfortune of adoring foreign words without knowing what they mean. One afternoon, we couldn't use the toilet because there were visitors in the office. Unable to wait, he went to the bathroom but didn't flush the toilet. To warn us of the unpleasant odor, he tacked a sign to the bathroom door. RSVP. Gas. Of course, he meant danger gas, but he thought RSVP looked more elegant. He didn't have the faintest idea that it meant, please reply. Yours, Anne. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. It's been long enough. Woo! Well, the reading here. Now, yeah, they're clearly getting on top of each other, getting on each other's nerves, even though it's not even been a full year yet. Yeah, you can see how it's getting to them. And, of course, Anne, being the youngest, she really has no one to talk to, no one to interact with. That's more on her level because she had friends going to school, but they've all had to go into hiding. And so she's really got no contact with anyone but her family and those she's hiding with. And of course, as we've seen, they don't always get along well. But yeah. Oh, goodness. But, yeah. It's getting very interesting. February of 1943 is where we'll be at. I think it's where we left off, February 5th, yeah. So we'll still be in February of 43 when we get back. And yeah. The diary, she has a lot of entries in 43. Yeah. In the middle here, they've got a bunch of images. So they did apparently live in Germany at one point and had to move to Holland. To Holland, the Netherlands, I think was the other name it was named. So yeah. And again, I think it's France, Belgium, Holland, if I remember my European geography correctly. But yeah, 43, 44. So we're getting into the real heart and depth of the book. Oh goodness. 43, 44. April 44. May of 44. Oh God, that sucks so much. June of 44. Knowing that the war ends in 45. Oh, they were so close. Anne's diary ends there. So what date was the last entry? August 1st, 1944. Knowing they were that close. I think VE Day was like May? Sometime in May or April of 45. So yeah, they weren't far at all. Oh, that sucks. We know in the end, though, Anne dies in one of the concentration camps. Her father, Otto, survives. I don't know about the rest of the family. I don't know who all lived and died, but yeah. That sucks, man. Just horrible. Anyway, we'll end this episode here. Thank you all. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Like, I could be wrong on the VE Day date. I know it was sometime, I believe, in early to mid 45, but again, I could be talking out my ass. We never know, which is quite a talent. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.